All right, let's begin. Good evening, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining us for a conversation with Puerto Rican photographer and arts educator, Chris Lopez, and survivor of the Hoboken fires, Janet Ayala. Tonight's event is titled Footnotes, a conversation on things lost and found in the fire. As much as it is a celebration of Chris Lopez and his recent exhibit titled The Fires, Hoboken 1978 to 1982, at the Hoboken Historical Museum, it is also a conversation about diasporic grief and friendship. My name is Kevin Ah-Sen. I am a doctoral student in the Faculty of Education at McGill University, and I am a Solidarity Fellow at the Diaspora Solidarities Lab, a Mellon-funded multi-institutional Black feminist partnership that supports solidarity work in Black and ethnic studies conducted by undergraduate, graduate students, postdoctoral fellows, faculty members, and community partners who are committed to transformative justice and accountable to communities beyond the Western Academy. Within the larger context of the DSL, I have the privilege to co-lead the Remains and Archive Microlab, where we specifically tend to and explore real and conceptual archipelagos of grief and how Black feminist principles have made way and possible the practices and spaces of refusal in the afterlife of empire. It is my honor to be hosting this event alongside my Remains and Archive co-lead, Jessica Newby, who is also a Solidarity Fellow at the DSL and a brilliant doctoral student in history at Johns Hopkins University. So we have some housekeeping notes. ASL interpretation and closed captioning are available for tonight's event. Should you benefit from closed captioning, you can locate and click the Show Caption button at the bottom of your screen. Also, this event will be recorded, so we ask all our participants to keep their mics and cameras off during the event until we arrive at the Q&A portion, during which you can submit your questions in the chat should you want us to ask them on your behalf, or you can select the raise hand option by clicking the reaction button, and we will ask you to unmute yourself then. Following our conversation with Chris and Janet, we will invite Dr. Yomaira Figueroa Vasquez to join us to offer some reflections. Dr. Figueroa Vasquez directs the Diaspora Solidarities Lab alongside Dr. Jessica Marie Johnson. Dr. Figueroa Vasquez is an associate professor of global Afro-diaspora studies at Michigan State University, and she is the author of the award-winning monograph, Decolonizing Diasporas, Radical Mappings of Afro-Atlantic Literature, and her forthcoming book, keep an eye out, The Survival of a People, which is to be published by Duke University Press. Throughout the evening, feel free to show some love in the chat and to post about our event on social media by using the hashtag DSLXFootnotes. Again, DSLXFootnotes. You can also tag us by using the handles DSL Projects and Remains Archive. Our co-hosts will be sharing that information in the chat.
Thank you, Kevin, and good evening, everyone. As he said, my name is Jessica Newby. I'm a PhD student at the Johns Hopkins University. In conversations that Kevin and I have had with Chris about the fires of Hoboken, 1978 to 1982, over the past several months, we were both in such awe of the sheer amount of labor that went into the project, the hours of research that he described spent in archives, hours spent searching for names and making phone calls or traveling long distances, the gripping and sometimes heartbreaking stories that Chris shared with us that were shared with him from survivors of the fires and their family members, and the lasting impact that something as simple as a picture can have on individuals, families, and on their close and extended communities. A footnote is a form of citation. It references the body of scholarship that the writer has contributed to and gives credit to the people whose work and methodologies have come before and inspired their own. As a microlab, the core philosophy of Remains is grounded in the practices of Black feminist thought, among them a politics of footnotes that is described by Black feminist and geography studies scholar Catherine McKittrick. Within this politics, the purpose of the footnote goes far beyond mere citation. She explains that it is not only to master knowing and centralize our knowingness, but to share how we know and share how we came to know, sharing information and stories and resources to build the capacity for social change. The pictures featured in The Fires of Hoboken represent a critical text in the overall body of scholarship on the fires, yet there are still so many real and conceptual footnotes to the original text left to be shared. Footnotes containing the unseen and unheard labor, stories, memories, and people who are both before and behind the camera. Tonight, Remains is honored to be able to create a space for the sharing and discussion of some of Chris and Janet's footnotes, sharing not only what they know and have created, but how they came to know and create, speaking into and filling a void of silence, and in so doing, building the capacity for change, healing, and recovery. As a lab, and as a broader community of the DSL, we remember the stories of witnesses and survivors of these horrific events, and we extend our gratitude to the people who refuse to let them be forgotten. Welcome, Chris and Janet.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
So, Chris, I want to get our conversation started by first asking you to talk to us first a bit more about your personal connection to Hoboken, whether it's through friends, families, and memories, and then describe how did you first come to the project itself?
Okay. So I have no personal connection to Hoboken whatsoever. But I came to this topic. I feel that, I guess, my age, I'm 38 years old. I'm an 80s baby. So the topic of gentrification is something very real and very visceral in my life. People of my age, I've seen such a great change come to so many places. My family is originally from the Bronx, and the Bronx is changing, even though it was the holdout borough for so long. But slowly but surely, gentrification is coming as well to the Bronx. And in my early 20s, I was living in Bushwick, Brooklyn, which was also a predominant Puerto Rican community, which at my time there, I had lived there for some years, 3 or 4 years. I had seen this change happening so rapidly, like in front of me. And so the topic of gentrification is something that I've really just had on my mind for a very long time, even as a younger man. And so in January of 2021, honestly, I guess it was just on my mind, and I wanted to educate myself about exactly what it is, instead of, the image I think that is popular that comes to mind when we think about gentrification is new types of people in your city that you don't recognize, of new backgrounds, and new coffee shops and new restaurants. And what I've come to learn in this process of research and educating myself on what gentrification is about, really those things that we think of, those telltale signs of this change, are really the tail end of what's actually happening. And that the gentrification of a city is something that is planned even decades before we sometimes may recognize it. And that is exactly what I came to learn about Hoboken. And what really just drew me to Hoboken was, at the time I was living in New Jersey. And, I was thinking to myself, well, what are the places that I know that are very gentrified places? And I thought of Williamsburg and Brooklyn, and then I thought of Hoboken. And so I Googled it, that good old faithful Google. And the things that I read, the things that I was reading, just broke me. I learned about the fires, and I read about all of the Puerto Rican people that were affected, displaced, and died because of this change. And I just couldn't look away. I found myself in front of my computer for a very long time without knowing that I was doing a project at all, reading and absorbing as much information as I could. And by the time I started to take notes of people's names is the time where I realized that I actually was working on this. And it, I guess, felt serendipitous. It felt just out of nowhere, but it was real. And I felt this need pretty immediately to be able to hear from the people whose names I was reading in these newspapers. I thought to myself, I know that they're out there. Where are they? And that was the thing that drove me most, was to make this contact and to just ask. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. It just got me thinking a lot about how much time is spent thinking about those relationships, and also thinking about the connection between you and those encounters. I think our next question would be a little bit along the same lines, in terms of talking a little bit about the nitty-grittiness of the process in your research. I think what's really fascinating for us as graduate students in thinking about research process is, like, it never goes as smoothly as we normally expect, nor do we think it's that things would just kind of come to us. But the kind of work that you've put in terms of looking and searching and building trust and connections, we would love to hear you to speak on that a little bit more.
Yeah. Well, it very much feels like a needle in a haystack when you're trying to break ground with a person that is out there. And so I relied very much in the beginning, when I didn't know anyone from Hoboken, on a public record search. I would search a name and it would populate dozens and dozens of names of the same name, Jose Rodriguez. I would search Jose Rodriguez, Hoboken, and it would be dozens and dozens of names. And so it takes a lot of persistence, and I would have to contact every single Jose Rodriguez. And so that was a very tedious work. And so essentially it's making cold calls to people and asking outright these really hard questions. Hi, are you Jose Rodriguez that was in a fire in 1981? No, I'm sorry, I'm not that one. Okay, thank you so much for your time. That's crazy, right?
Yep,
That's
on to the next one.
That's crazy. And so, you keep calling, and it feels like a small miracle when you're able to meet the actual Jose Rodriguez. And it's complicated because it's like, you'll make a call, not everybody picks up, right? We don't have the luxury of them being like, nope, not me. Woo, scratch that one off. No, they don't pick up the phone. So you have to leave a message. And then you have to make a note to reach back out, because maybe they got your message, but they don't want to get back. So you'll have to just keep this circle of keeping contact with this balance of voice messaging and texting until you find your person. And it takes months. It's never come easy. And so when you actually meet that person, I can't even really describe the feeling of finding that person. It's like you can breathe. And then, other times now that my work has evolved and I'm in contact with more and more people, I rely more on, 6 degrees of separation. But in Hoboken's a small place, so it's more like 1 degree of separation. So being in community with people from Hoboken who still remain there, and who can remember those times and share their stories because of my exhibition in the space that we've been given there in the city, has been, monumental for my work. But Janet can speak on this. How long had it taken us to first speak?
Well, my son got the message and he told me there's someone that's trying to write the history of the fires. And he told me, that he has spoken to someone and they contacted him. And I said, okay, I'll check it out. But
Me pichaste.
But I ditched him. Yeah, I did ditch him. I ditched him. I didn't make the initial call to speak to Chris almost a year later. Because in my mind, there was like, I was waiting for the memorial project to happen, and that got canceled due to COVID, and then it just went on.
Which we originally just did the memorial service.
Which we just did the memorial service, yes.
Yeah.
And I was just thinking, oh, nothing's coming out of this either. So, but then I went to Puerto Rico looking for the remains of my family. And when I finally did find where my mom is supposed to be resting, and I think I left so angry that I didn't find not even a marker, that when I got home, I picked up that phone and I called Chris. And we set up a time to talk. And we did. Boy, did we did. Because I didn't know I was being recorded at the time.
That's the first rule of investigative journalism, by the way.
Don't tell them that you're being recorded.
You're being recorded. I don't know how
So
ethical all that is, but that's,
yeah, well, I didn't give him a chance to tell me
Yeah,
that
because
he was,
you start speaking immediately.
yes, as soon as he picked up, and it was that day to do the interview, when he picked up the phone, when one of us, when we got
Right.
connected,
You said to me, oh, well, I have a story to tell you.
I have a story to tell you.
Yeah.
And didn't give him the chance to reply, you're being recorded,
I
so
don't
I
even-
just went off
Right.
and he recorded it.
Yeah. That's a powerful recording.
It's a powerful recording, it is.
Yeah.
Very powerful.
Jana, if I can ask, first, what was it that made you skeptical initially about, the interest in the project? And then what changed in between that year in which your son first told you about it, and then that phone call that you had with Chris a year later? What was it that kind of initiated that shift?
Excuse me. Well, I didn't believe that anybody was going to really look up all that information and make it public knowledge. For as long as I can remember, nothing was ever said about these fires. And even if you mentioned the fires, people would like, they would say they don't know nothing about it. So when since the memorial project was canceled back then, I figured, you know what, I don't want to put my hopes up because I don't want to be disappointed again. But after that visit to Puerto Rico and finding my mother's grave with nothing on it, when I went back home, I went angry. I was angry because most of these fires the reason was to erase us from Hoboken. And I feel that they actually accomplished that when it came to my family, because most people know where their families are buried. But I was so traumatized because I lived in the building that all I remembered that we were taking the bodies to Puerto Rico, that somebody was helping my grandmother with the burial needs. And even though we lived about 40 minutes from Bayamon, Puerto Rico, that's where they're buried. And traumatized and going in a school bus, it just wiped out where it was at. So when I came back angry. It's like, why do they have to not be, they were completely erased. For me, they were erased because now there's not even a place, a resting place for her and my stepdad and my brother and my nephew. And after all these years, I think, for me, some of my closure and some of my healing is really going to be due on accomplishing my mother's dream. My mom lived in Puerto Rico, and in the same house she lived, I lived with my children. So for me, that healing, as soon as I can say, we're going to actually put a headstone on their graves, is when I think my closure or my healing will begin. It has begun because of Chris, but it's still quite a journey. And the other thing is that I'm the only one left that is able to actually do something. I have no other family that can do it.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that, Janet. We'll talk a little bit about how we could support you too in that project, because I know Chris has set up a GoFundMe for that, and we would love to share that at the end of our conversation.
Thank you very much.
Jessica and I are just in awe of the kind of work that when we started learning about Chris's work, about his work, but then learning more about your involvement in this project as well. It's a team effort, and it's such a heavy project to carry and to share sometimes, because even just talking about this or sharing the project with the public, it requires you to kind of come back to a place of grief and pain. So I really just want to say thank you for being here tonight and being with us. I was wondering if you would like to share a little bit about your family, your children. I know Chris has talked a little bit about, in our previous conversations, about those conversations about the fire with your children. And so I was wondering if you would like to speak on that a little bit.
Okay. I have 5 children. From the oldest 41, the youngest is 31. And we have 10 grandchildren, counting the one that we lost about 10 years ago to nephrotic syndrome. My kids have been my life. I survived, and I was able to try and form some kind of life for them without having them in knowing everything. Yet they knew a little bit about the fires. They know that's where they lost their grandmother, they lost an uncle, a cousin, but they had never heard the entire story until Chris actually played it for them. And I'm here because of my children. They helped me survive. And the worst time, at the worst possible time that I was in, that I did become suicidal, they were basically the ones that stopped me. When they were all in school and daycare, and I'm on my way to the kitchen and I see all their things and I dial 911. But I figured I don't have a family. So we decided to have a big family. I should have known the consequences back then about having 5 children, but I learned the hard way. But I'm very grateful that I met the husband that I have, and I have the children that I have. And I would, like in every family, there's always ups and downs, but yeah, our life has revolved around our children and our family life.
The day that I came to visit, who was there?
Everybody. Everybody was there.
I thought that
Was that intentional?
Yes.
I thought that I was gonna go. Janet, you didn't tell me.
What?
You told me that people were gonna be in the house, but I mean, I got into this house and there's like 30 people up in the house. I saw every single one of your children, grandchildren. Sí, me puede dar un chin, gracias.
Yes,
Café, negro.
when Chris said that he wanted, to take family pictures, I'm like,
Very Puerto Rican. I was like, okay, everybody's up in here. I was like, let's take some family pictures. And we had to move the couch.
we moved the couch. The biggest wall in my living room, we barely fit because not
Too
only
many people.
there was too many. My 5 children were there. The 3, my daughter-in-law, my other 2 son-in-laws, then all the grandkids were there. So it was kind of
And it's hard to get everybody under one roof, right?
it's very hard to get them all in at the same time.
How were you able to get them in?
Because you told me, let's do this on the 8th. It was something around that date.
Uh-huh.
So I called everybody. I need everybody to take this day off.
Mhm.
And they're like, okay, Mom, I can do it. Then another one couldn't do it. And then one of the grandkids couldn't take off work. So we all came up with the 12th.
Right,
And I told them, this is important to me.
right.
And they all showed up.
Yeah.
They all showed up with the spouse and the children, and it was a packed house.
It was packed, boy. It was Thanksgiving up in there.
Mhm.
Can I ask what was the order of taking the pictures? Like, did the family pictures come first before?
The family picture certainly came first. Yeah, well, when we all got there, there was a slow trickle, right? People started slowly arriving more and more, and I got to overwhelmingly meet everybody in your family.
Yep,
Abrazos y besos y
a
todo
lot of
eso.
hugs and kisses.
And so, so then when everybody was there, I said, okay, family picture time. And my goodness, it must have been 25 people, 30 people.
I don't know how many.
It was like 25, 30 people.
I lose count.
Yeah, you lose count. And so then, we had to move a huge couch. All the furniture was in a hallway. You couldn't even walk by the hallway. And then we got everybody together for a really beautiful family picture,
Mhm.
a very beautiful family picture.
Yep, you don't get those very often.
No, that was everybody in the family. And so after that, what we had decided, so when we went to the house to take your family photographs, Janet and I had already gone to do our photos, the photo that of that now lives in the project as Janet's photograph, which is the photograph of her holding a photograph of her mom, which is also really interesting because when we started speaking, that photograph of your mom hadn't been in conversation. I remember it took a couple times where you were like, Chris, I have this photo of my mom, but I have to find it.
Yeah,
Something like that.
and I still haven't found them.
Okay.
There's two pictures that my mom is in it and my stepdad. You don't have a picture of my stepdad yet.
I don't.
And I do have one. I have one of my mom with my stepdad in,
Negro. Sin azúcar.
and I haven't found them. I put them away so well because I didn't want anything happening to it, that I put them away so well that I have not found them.
Mhm. And so,
If we could get into the history of this picture, we're showing it right now.
yeah,
Picture that Janet is holding. If you could talk a little bit more the history of this picture, because it is so striking, and tell us how how it came to be, or how it came to be in your possession, and then how did you save and preserve it for all these years?
This picture does have a story to it.
I don't think I know.
This photo was my grandmother's. And when I went to live in Puerto Rico, that I decided to go back to New Jersey, she gave me this picture because I really didn't have pictures of my mom. They all went up in flames. So she gave me the picture, and I've had it ever since. When I went back to New Jersey, my brother and my sister came to visit. I had a get together for one of the kids, and they both showed up. And my brother tells me, oh, that picture is mine. And I looked at him, no, it's not. Grandma gave me this picture. And he's like, no, grandma gave it to me first. So I told them, well, she gave it to you first, but you didn't take it. So now it's mine, and it's not moving from this house. He left upset because I wouldn't give him the picture. I don't let nobody mess with this picture. It is one of my favorite pictures of her. And like I said, I really don't have many. So this one's really special to me.
Yeah.
And it was hand painted.
Mhm.
That's a hand painting.
Mhm.
When did you first mention the picture to Chris? How did it come to be within the actual exhibit?
I think I had been asking you for photos from the very early on.
Yeah.
But you were obviously said, I don't have many photos because they were lost in fire.
Yep.
And you had come to me one day and you
said,
were super excited. You're like, Chris, I have this. I want to show you this.
Yep. I wanted to show you my mom's picture.
Right. And yeah, and so when I heard about the existence of this photograph, I knew what my photograph would be. And so I can remember traveling to Florida to meet with Janet for the very first time.
Mm-hmm.
And after many months of conversations.
After lots of months of conversation.
After many months of conversations about not only your experience in Hoboken, just life. Just life. And so I remember being, on my way to Florida to meet Janet for the first time, as I'm meeting with so many people for this project, you get very nervous. I remember being very, very nervous and trying to run everything that I can in my mind, because I know that I'm on my way to something so precious, and I needed to be able to handle it with care. And my role as an image maker is to really, the best word to describe it is justice. I think there needs to be justice, and I have this there's this fear, there's this, like adrenaline, or something that you're just, I have to do this justice or it's going to break me. I have to honor this person and honor this person's mom and this photograph, then I have to be extremely present, and I have to be very focused, and I have to be very there. And so thinking about it, the day that I went to Janet's house, I drove around her neighborhood for probably over an hour, scouting locations where I could take this photograph. And it's funny because when I got there, I told you that, and you're like, I knew you would. You're like, I knew you would get here early.
Yep.
And so I did. I was there early, and I scouted this location.
There's usually no water in that location. That was floods after Hurricane Ian.
Right. And I had learned that only by driving around.
By driving around.
And I was seeing all these flooded areas, and I said, this is very connective. They said, this is very important. The water in that place was almost above the tables. You could see that it had flooded the street in the back.
Yeah.
And it just made so much sense that the photograph could be here. And you want me to continue? I can talk about the photograph, taking the photograph.
Please continue, please.
Yeah, and so then, so that day, I got to the house, and Janet, she wasn't dressed, she wasn't ready to go.
He's throwing me under the
She
bus
was in her
already.
rollers. I said, beat that. No, right. Okay.
No, it was when you got there. I was already ready, basically.
Right, you had the rollers up.
But I had my hair in the rollers. I still have my gown because normally I do my hair and then
I felt at
get
home. I
dressed.
said, yo, I'm home, man.
And-
Look at this.
And I said, he says, well, let's go here, let's go there. And I'm like, hold on, but I'm not even ready. I didn't know we were going anywhere.
Right,
And he says, well, I found these spots and I want to go there to take some pictures.
that's right.
And then he tells me, oh, and bring your mom's picture. And it's like, we carried her picture through Deltona.
Through Deltona. We drove around with that photograph.
Yeah.
We took it on a tour. And so Janet came out in this stunning orange dress that she is so beautifully dressed in her photograph.
I don't see where you see orange though.
It's orange. What color is that to you? It's maybe like a
It's a more,
orange brown.
yeah.
Okay,
He keeps saying I was in an orange dress.
it's orange to me. Everybody
Girls,
keeps
do you
telling
see
me-
orange?
I think it's like a brick. They call it a brick.
Huh?
I think it's more like a red brick shade, but it's
Thank
whatever.
you. Brick color, you see?
Brick.
You got it perfect. You got it right on the,
For posterity from now
Yep.
on.
it's brick.
Beautiful brick dress. I don't know how flattering all that sounds. You see me?
Yeah, now I'm a brick.
Now I'm a brick. Yeah, now you're a brick. Oh, she was dressed like a brick. No, I'm not gonna say. I'm not gonna say. I'm not gonna say.
He
Okay.
knows I'm coming home.
So, okay. Anyway, your dress was very beautiful,
Thank you.
and your hair was very beautiful.
Thank you.
So, okay, so we drive around to several locations, and where this photograph was taken was the last location that we went to, which
Yep.
was the closest one to your home.
Yes.
Like down the street, like 5 minutes. And so when we get there, I told Janet, I don't think I had told you previously. I think I told you when we got there, maybe. I can't
Which one
remember.
of them?
Okay, so when we got there, I played Janet our phone conversation for the first time,
Oh, okay, yes.
right?
Yeah.
That was a
I
surprise.
had, yeah.
That was a surprise.
I told him, okay, after when you get it,
Send it to you,
as soon as you edit, well, send it to me so I can hear it.
right?
And he tells me, okay. And I'm waiting, I'm waiting, and I don't get anything.
Mhm.
And it's like, he must be up to something,
You
so.
knew it. You
I already
knew
know.
it. I know you know.
I already knew it was, you were up to something. So when we actually hear, he has me holding the picture and he's playing my story back, which I hadn't heard. And it was hard. That part was really, 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 really hard. Was hearing myself in that tone of voice. And, you know, at first I knew it was emotional, but then I listened to it again. And I kind of sound angry at the same time. Because I was angry. I came back from Puerto Rico very angry. So even though it sounds really emotional, I found at the beginning when I started, it's like I kind of heard the anger in my voice.
I think that it's so powerful to hear like the behind the scenes details. And this is precisely why, you know, we kind of shaped this event around footnotes, because looking at the picture, you wouldn't know that you're listening to the sound of you telling your own story, and how that came, it shines through hearing you explain it. Like the expression on your face, the way that you're holding the photograph, your stance, it's all connected to this story that actually produced the image that we see.
Yes, that's correct.
We stood for a while listening. I remember I had taken some photographs, I think in the beginning, but I think for a long time, we just listened.
Yeah,
And then I started more and more feeling kind of
more
comfortable with taking the photographs of you. I think I was waiting for you to like process it and for you to just, you know, sort of just like for it to be okay. And then there was this moment where I remember you accepted what was happening. It was like a total collaboration between you and I in this way. And it was very, very powerful. And when you look at all of the images, because there's many images from this day, a lot of them are very emotional, but I chose this one because it was, I think, the only photograph that I have from that moment where Janet has this look, you have this look of like, it was like this result, like this pride almost, like we were coming to the end of that recording and all the tears and everything had come out. And there was this really calm moment where you were truly, truly, truly listening. And you just looked right at me and there was this something of pride. And I said to myself, I chose it because this is not work. My work is not work particularly about people crying. You know, that's not what this work is. You know, my work is very much about a person, you know, standing tall.
And like I told you before, I know I've told you this, is that's been my survival. That was my mode of survival, was everything could have been falling apart. I could be having the worst day ever. But if I was going to step out, or if I was going to receive anyone, I would fix myself up. That's how I coped. It's like, okay, I know I'm going through this. I know what you know, how bad this is, but I don't want nobody else to know. And that's how I sheltered my children.
And yourself.
And myself, yes. And people look at me and, oh, you look great. Yeah, I have heart issues, lung issues, stomach issues, mental health issues, but I can hide it pretty good. I became very good at hiding my emotions. I had to be. So I could raise my children and I can work and deal with life itself. That's what I had to do. And that's why there is that pride, because I was able to hide for so long.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Thank you again for sharing. It's a lot to take in. It's a lot to read as well. Yeah, I remember when Chris shared this photo with us. Yeah, we were just so captivated by the emotions in this photo, but also in some ways we were able to see the emotions in this photo. I think it's just it's a beautiful photo, and I would love to ask a follow-up question.
I told him, from all the pictures you took, you had to take the ugliest one and put it up. I gave him hell for that one.
It's beautiful. It's beautiful in every way.
Thank you.
I was wondering if you could share, both of you, whoever wants to take up the question first, to share a little bit about the reception of the exhibit and the reception of the photograph, what you've witnessed or what you've overheard, or in terms of even how the family reacted to the exhibit. We could talk a little bit about that as well.
Okay. Like I said, my children knew the story, but I never listened to the story. The day that we were doing the photographs, that day they heard it in my voice. And it was kind of hard for them.
We played the recording for them.
You play the recording for them. And I mean, what my son actually just wanted to walk away. He didn't want to hear it. And I told them, I need you to listen. And they did. But it was really heartbreaking for them. But it was worth it because I wanted them to know. I just didn't want them to suffer because of it. So when I came up for the museum exhibit, I was taken aback. I was really taken aback by the sheer volume of information there. And I was just looking and reading, and I'm like, I can't believe this. This is incredible. I can't believe I never knew. Because that's where the anger came. I didn't know. I didn't know there was people helping the ones that were displaced, you know, the ones that came out of the fires. I didn't know there was nobody back then helping anybody. And through this project and with Chris, I have found out information that I didn't know. The other thing about the exhibit that really shook me was like, it made it real. It made it so that I can actually look at these things and actually say, I wasn't crazy. Because for a long time, you think you're the one that's crazy because it's not possible for all these things to happen.
Yeah. Quite often that's the case with a lot of people that I speak with. Enough time passes where they express to me, they tell me that it almost feels like a dream, like it didn't happen, like
Yes.
like they're crazy. And so many times, just like you, Janet, so many people, survivors of these fires, say thank you, because it's like validates everything I've already known, but that I feel that
Nobody else would believe it.
Believe it, right?
People didn't believe you. I mean, they would think, oh, she just went through a fire and she lost her family.
Right.
Not knowing that, no, it was just not a fire. It was fires. That was my mother's third fire. That was my second fire. So we had gone through the fire process a few times.
Right. And you were telling me that even your sister had moved out.
Yep. My sister also lived in the Pinter's Hotel. She lived in the apartment underneath me. And my mother's apartment was next to me. We were door with door. I lived in this apartment and she lived in her apartment. And then I had my sister living on the bottom apartment. But there was already rumors going around. There were comments at the bar downstairs, and she's, she warned us, guys, you got to be careful. But she actually moved out. She didn't want to stay, so she moved out. And that's the only reason why I still have my sister and my niece, because she actually moved out right before the fire happened.
Yeah. And then we met the firefighter at the museum, Frank Daliani, who told us, you want me to say it?
Say it.
Yeah, we had met a fireman who was an active fireman during this time. He did not respond to the Pinter Hotel fire, but
No.
he had responded to many other fires.
Others, yeah.
And he shared with Janet and I that one of the things that is most traumatic for him, or the thing that really sticks with him from all of this time, is that firemen used to survey buildings who had this great threat of being burned by arson. And they would do these surveys where they would do walkthroughs through the buildings to see where they could gain access in the event of a fire they knew was coming. And he says the thing that has haunted him the most from this time is that as they would, firemen dressed as firemen would survey and tour through these buildings, people would come out of their houses, into the halls, and they knew why the firemen were there. And, he said the fear on their face to know, like, I know why you're here. You're touring this building because we're going to burn.
Yep.
And it was like just the most devastating thing. And so that was a huge thing for me to hear. You remember that day with Frank?
Yes.
That was a devastating thing to hear.
When he said all those things, I was like, wow.
Yeah.
So there was people that were trying to help.
Yeah.
Because under the impression that it was the mayor, there's also the comments that there were firemen and police officers involved. So to have actually come to this event and actually meet these people have made a really, really big impact on the way I see and think about it now. Because to me, they were all bad. And usually that's not the case with anything. You always have your good with your bad. But in all these years, that's basically, I blamed everybody. So when I met Frank and Tom, and then the guy that hugged me on the day of the memorial, Tommy Malta, that's his name.
The ambulance man.
Yes. And then I find out on this trip up, I find out that I meet the person that helped put my sister in the ambulance, because after everything was done, I went with the priest to notify my sister that, there was a fire, and our mom, her son, and our brother, and she wasn't really believing. So we went back to the site, and she tried running into the building when she saw the building was so burnt up. And between my husband my deceased husband, and was he a fireman or
he was an ambulance, volunteer ambulance.
He was ambulance, right?
Yes.
He was the one that helped put my sister in the ambulance. So I've learned a lot. The other thing is there's a case at the museum with some sketches. I think you have a picture of them.
Oh yeah.
That's sketches. And after the fire, because we told the police, the firefighters, to let us go up, that, we would risk it. We would just go up through that window.
As the fire was
occurring. And he tells us, no. And you know what? This is something that just came to me. He said nobody could go up because the building was already starting to collapse. And he says something else. I lost it, but I'll get it back.
Okay. I know you will.
Yeah.
I'll ask.
Yeah, I know you will. That's why I said we'll come back to it.
I think the other thing that I'm struck by hearing you talk about how is that this fire, there was a community that existed before the fires, but during the fires and in the aftermath of the fires, now there's a broader community of people who were affected, not just the people that lived in the building, but the firefighters and the first responders who responded to the fire and helping to save lives. And Chris, I think that's one of the most powerful legacies of your project, is that it shed light on this broader community that's been created. And a community of people who are displaced and thought that they were forgotten, and that this project is making it clear that they're not. So I just, once again, we can't thank you enough for sharing your work with us, and then like allowing us to help remember the survivors of the fire, and then the people who responded to the fire itself. We're winding down, and so I want to be able to give time to our audience members to ask questions. But just in closing, what are ways that, having heard your stories, our viewing audience can offer their support to you and Janet and other survivors of the fires, and support that includes financial support as well? Please let us know.
Currently, as Janet had said earlier in the beginning of our talk, she has not known the final resting places of her family. Her mom, stepdad, cousin,
No,
nephew,
brother and nephew.
I'm so sorry. And recently found the final resting places of her mom and stepfather in Bayamon.
Yeah,
And
we're still looking for my brother and my nephew.
yeah.
I have more or less where they're at. I'm pretty sure that I can find them a little bit quicker this time around because of the information I already have found. So for me, like I mentioned at the beginning, my healing journey is it started with this project and with Chris. But what's gonna make it to the point that I'm gonna be able to say, I can leave this and continue my life and enjoy my children and my grandchildren without having it in the back of my head, would be basically for them to have final resting places that are, you know, a decent resting spot with a proper headstone. And then if there's anything left over, there's a house in Puerto Rico that Maria destroyed. And my mom used to say that that's where she was going to retire to. That was going to be her final stop, was this house in Puerto Rico. So as a tribute or as a memorial, I want to do something with this house. So like that, I can tell my niece, this is where your grandmother was raised. This is where you were born, because Maria was born there.
Well,
okay, my children, I had 2 children that I had in Puerto Rico. They both lived this house. And unfortunately, the person that was watching over it, as soon as the Maria hit, and there was no more rental money, because he had it rented out and he will receive the money to maintain it. Well, after Maria, there was no maintenance. They abandoned the house with all the furniture inside. The roof is gone. So when we went, we cleaned it up some. We got some of the overgrowth out of the way, at least take out the garbage from the house, inside the house. But this is something that I really, really, really want to accomplish, is actually get these headstones in and see if I can at least make the house presentable to the point that I can take my children back and say, this is where your grandmother was raised. This is ours. Also my niece, because she doesn't have anybody else.
Yeah.
So
we currently have a GoFundMe.
we have a GoFundMe account
Yeah,
that is attached to the story at the museum.
at the museum, that's right.
And that's the way we're trying to collect
Right.
funds
And any
through
assistance,
through the
through the site. GoFundMe.
through the GoFundMe site. And any help I can get, I really would appreciate, because we are a working family. And unfortunately, I've been on medical leave for over a year. I have not been doing so well health-wise. So as we speak, I'm still on a medical leave. But that's something I really want to accomplish.
Yeah.
And so in the sense that you all are able to spread the word and provide on the site to help get donations for these efforts is greatly appreciated.
Yeah. The GoFundMe link is in the chat. It will also be on our website. So you'll see that circulating quite a lot. Before we get into Q&A with the audience, I would like to invite Dr. Figueroa Vasquez to join us to offer some reflections. Dr. Figueroa Vasquez is from Hoboken, has deep connections to the history of the fires as well. So during this time, for those who have questions, feel free to plug them in the chat. And if you want to ask your question directly, you may unmute yourself then. So after Dr. Figueroa Vasquez, we'll turn it over to the audience.
Thank you, Kevin and Jessica, for organizing this. And I'm so happy to be here with you, Chris, and with you, Miss Janet. Thank you so much for sharing your story. Miss Janet, we don't know each other, but I have been able to kind of hear part of your story through Chris's work. I'm from Hoboken, born and raised on 9th and Garden, 923 Garden Street. And my family, the majority of all of my mother's family and my father's family all came from Puerto Rico, from Caguas and Ayala, to Hoboken in the 1970s and lived there and survived the fire there. As a result of all the arsons in Hoboken, everyone on my mother's family, on my mother's side of the family, all left Hoboken. They were so terrified. And my aunt lived on Willow Street, on 12th and Willow, or 11th and Willow, the big fire across the street from Wallace School, the one that took up the whole block. And it was after that fire that everyone packed up and left. And my mother is the only one that stayed behind. We stayed on Garden Street until our apartment burned in the late 1990s. So these fires have a very long history from the early 1970s all the way to the 1990s, upon which then we were displaced and we moved to the projects on 3rd and Harrison Street. But I wanted to say that, what's really interesting to me about this is, I want to share how I met Chris also, because I love the story of how you met Chris. So I'm writing, I'm a professor, and I'm writing my second book right now. And part of that book is tracing the history of these arsons, in particular, tracing my own family's survival of these fires, and the way that it has haunted the city and haunted, Puerto Ricans in the city as well, and I'm sure, Ms. Janet, you remember growing up or coming up in Hoboken during the time that you were there. It was very much a Puerto Rican town, it was largest ethnic group. And I remember doing research and looking at the demographics and the census, and it's showing that Hoboken had the largest Puerto Rican population per capita of any place in the United States. Even, percentage-wise, larger than New York City. It was a Puerto Rican town. And that's a town that I remember growing up in. And I always wondered why, why is it when we think about Hoboken, we don't think about that history? Why is it that Puerto Ricans were seen as such a scourge to the city, as an unwanted group of people? And all of the tensions that we grew up with between the Puerto Ricans and the Italians and all that other stuff that we all know from being in that place. I remember having all my little friends in the tenements on Garden Street, and our building had a lot of Puerto Rican families, but in the next building we have a lot of Italian families. And I remember never being allowed to go into the house. I could play with them on the street, but if one of my little friends from down the block brought me into the house, the parents or the grandparents would be like, get her out, And so that's kind of the undercurrent of the kinds of things that were happening in Hoboken at the time. But anyway, I met this.
Also, apart from the fires back then, there were also a lot of displacement from employment.
Yeah, absolutely.
Was making it really difficult for us to survive in Hoboken, because I recall that before the fire, my stepdad lost his job. And then after the fire, my husband lost his printing job.
Yeah.
So it was fires, and work was just
Yeah.
It's
And most
superior.
of the people, yeah, and most of the people were getting pushed to continue to work in the factories, right? Like, and in low paying jobs. I mean, so I was doing this work and I wanted to find like what was left of the story, because it's a story that you grow up with, but like you mentioned in the beginning of the conversation, it's so much it's so silent, right? It's like people talk about, yeah, we know the fires, but we don't want to talk about the fires, right? Like we don't acknowledge it. And even in me doing my research, and even me and Chris doing our research, we have been confronted with people trying to silence us and tell us, you know, like, you don't know what you're talking about. You know, you're saying things that are very dangerous. If you know what's good for you, you will, you know, stop trying to like investigate. What are you trying to do? You're trying to blame somebody, you know, and it's kind of like there's such a, the city itself is so defensive about it at the same time that they're trying to erase it. And so I met Chris when I was trying to do work in the museum, and I remember going to Bob Foster, who's the director of the museum, and saying I wanted to see these archives. And he, you know, and he was like, oh, you know, you should meet the young man. He's doing this work in with the same, he's asking for the same kind of paperwork that you're asking for, the same archives and stuff. And he's doing this big project on the fires. And I remember being like, I don't know this person. Like, I don't care about what this person is doing with the fire. Like, I'm from here. Like, I'm interested in what I'm gonna do, you know? But Bob was like, no, he's really good people. You should meet him. You know, he's Puerto Rican and whatever. And so I got to meet Chris and we hit it off right away. And I realized that, you know, me being from Hoboken and growing up in that place, I had a particular point of view and a particular story that I wanted to tell as someone of a legacy of survivors of this place. But Chris coming with a fresh perspective as somebody that's not from Hoboken, it really brought in a whole nother level. And I think sometimes it takes that person to step in, to ask you the questions that you don't want to answer, that you don't want to reckon with it, right? And so I thought for me, it was such a beautiful thing that he was doing with his project. And, you know, one of the things that I'll say is, you know, I grew up with these fires, always like running away from constant fires. And my sister, my older sister, kind of grew up in the opposite way, running towards the fires. My sister's now a fire captain in Hoboken, and she grew up.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So she grew up in the same kind of, she's older than me and grew up even more with it, and decided that she wanted to dedicate her life to like not, you know, other people not having to live through the same kinds of things that she lived, right? So she's like the first Latina, the first woman firefighter, the first Latina, the first fire captain in Hoboken. But because of that, I have had the privilege of having unprecedented access to the fire department, to talking to people who will talk to me about those experiences. And so when you're talking about the firefighters, you know, one of the most powerful interviews that I've done is talking to one of the battalion chiefs now, who was a rookie firefighter in the 90s, but he worked with, like, his senior officers were the ones that were working the Pinter fire, you know, the fire at, you know, on First Street, the one on 11th Street, right? And one of the things that he was saying is like, you know, there was some collusion, there was racism, there was all those things, but that he remembers that the firefighters were also deeply traumatized by the fires, and that a lot of the fires were Vietnam vets. And they came from Vietnam and they were firefighters. And when they would leave those fires, they would be completely destroyed. It destroyed a lot of their lives seeing that. Now, there was a handful of firefighters that did benefit from the fires because they would go in and they would go buy the buildings, right? Right from under them. But the majority of them were really suffering, in particular, suffering seeing the children, so many children dying. And one of the things that he said was about one particular firefighter who I won't name here, I write about in the book. And he said, pardon my language, he said, that dude was the most racist motherfucker on two legs. Yeah. But when there was a fire, right, like he would run into that building. He would hate all those people, but he would run into it and he would pull as many people as he wanted out, right? I mean, as he could out, right? And he said, you know, he would see that kind of switch. So I think it's so interesting to think about that, because I think we are trying to figure out, like, who allowed this to happen, right? Who are the bad guys in the story? And I think the more you talk to people, the more complicated it gets. But I think for me, the main thing was like, I'm so tired of hearing that it was the fault of the families, that it was because they live like that, it's because they did it, it's because whatever, like, you know, that's their culture. Whenever they get mad, they set their buildings on fire. Like, there was so much racist and messed up things that were being talked about, or that were being blamed, right? People were being blamed for their own deaths. And for me, that is the part that is unacceptable to me, right? Like, and so I'm really, really happy to be working with Chris and for us to be like dovetailing our work together, to be able to illuminate as many stories as possible. I really want Hoboken to step up and not just a plaque and not just a memorial, but to do something to acknowledge that this was the people that marked that city and that city marked us, you know? Yeah, there's a lot more that I want to say, but I just want to leave space for other people to ask questions and say that I'm just so happy to be here to share this with you. Me dan ganas de llorar, pero gracias por compartir con nosotros las cosas más íntimas de tu vida. Yo sé que no es fácil perder a tu familia como la perdiste, ni es fácil hasta ahora, 40 años después, decirnos y contarnos esas historias, pero yo quiero que tú sepas que es una de las cosas más importantes que puedes hacer, es mantener la memoria de tu familia viva, y viva no solamente con tu familia, pero con nosotros que no te conocemos, para que también nuestros estudiantes y los que están aquí viendo esto puedan tener en su boca los nombres de tu familia y la memoria de ellos y cuánto tú los querías y cuánto los quieres ahora, tanto que has compartido con nosotros estas cosas tan bellas. Entonces, te tengo que dar las gracias a ti y a Chris también. Por una cosa que...
Me encantaría poder hablar más con usted.
Sí, claro.
I just found, I got to know about you not too long ago, so I have been looking forward to speaking to most of the people that I'm meeting.
Yeah.
Because it's like, it's exciting in a way because I never expected this to happen, and it is actually happening. So yes, I would love to sit down and have a conversation with you.
I would love that. I would love that too. And it brings all like the things together. So I think it's like a perfect time because this is, stories that I've been wanting to tell my whole life. I'm sure stories that you've been holding your whole life. And then Chris comes in and we can all come together to tell a story. And it might be the time, it might be the moment to bring this and open it. And I've been talking to all my tias and to my mother, one of the things I went to Puerto Rico this summer and I was interviewing all my aunts about their experiences with the fire, why they left Hoboken, how scared they were, how they got burned out of their apartments, how they took their kids and ran, and my mother, who does not speak of that time, she said, "Ven acá, what are you doing? What are you talking to my sisters about?" She wanted to know. And I was like, "Oh, sobre, los incendios." And she was like, "Well, I have a story to tell you." And she told me a story that I had never heard before, something that she se lo tragó, and she didn't want to share it, and I think that is really important. The more we tell the story, lo más que uno comparte, más otra persona sienten esa confianza de compartir y uno se desahoga, so.
Yes, and it's necessary. It is necessary because the Pinter's Hotel was deemed hell on 14th Street. Well, I agree with that. The only difference is it's been hell my entire life.
Right.
Because losing the trunk of the tree trunk of the family, you end up alone.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I look forward to talking with you, and I'm going to step away and let folks ask questions también. Pero Chris, nos ponen en contacto.
Thanks, Yamara.
Thank you so much, Dr. Figueroa Vasquez. We have time for a couple of questions from our audience. I'm going to first dip into a question that was dropped into the chat. I'm just thinking of the diaspora labs, micro labs, who many of them currently are conducting interviews, listening and transcribing very difficult and sometimes painful stories as well. Chris, this is a question for you, but Janet, maybe you want to also chime in as well. How do you maneuver the exchange of stories as someone who serves as a faithful witness? What would you advise individuals who are maybe in the process of doing research or trying to craft testimonies and listen to survivors of of tragedies. Could you describe in your experience in the aftermath, did you give yourself some space to decompress? How did you move forward?
My advice is write yourself a letter. You need to understand the why. You need to know why you're doing it. You need to stand your ground, and you never back down from that. So when I first realized that I was starting this project, I wrote a small list, probably got like 8 things on it. And that was my why. And every once in a while, I'll go back to that why and I read it. And that why is my core. That's the thing that guides me. And if you are driven towards something, you stay the course. It is a long, slow process, but that processing it is really the key. It's like, if anyone that I speak to, that I interview, that has shared something particularly, that has shared something really hard to share with me, I take the time to really just sit with that and think about what they've said.
Was it hard to listen to my story?
Girl, I cried the whole time.
Oh, I guess
cried
so
the
then.
whole time. It was so hard to hear your story. Oh my God, it devastates me. And, a big part of the reason why I started this work is because I take it personal. I take it personal. I'm Puerto Rican. Any one of those people could have been my aunt, my mother, my titi, my tío, all of those people, all those beautiful people, those beautiful names that I know. You know what it is?
And Chris, I was gonna say, sorry, and thinking about like our conversation about the way that the newspapers misspelled our names. They just tore up, like they just quoted people the wrong way. I mean, just you could tell that like some people that were reporting didn't even care like about the kind of story that they were writing. Like think of the same people that they were naming all the time, and it was so disgusting when you see that, like because those are people's lives,
There's reporters that were blatantly racist and throwing Puerto Ricans under the bus in a newspaper, right? I actually had this experience the other day. I'm going to make this story as quick as possible. I ran into an ex-firefighter just by chance at a diner. We sit. He was a fire captain. He responded to the Pinter Hotel fire. The Janet survived. He's sitting, he's talking. And before he even starts talking to me about things, I think there's something about telling it to me as a person that is, I don't know, just like out of nowhere or something. They trust me, or it's like, I think
because
40 years.
It's been 40 years of us being quiet.
Right. And it's like enough.
Yes. And when you find somebody that is
that's just asking.
Yeah,
I don't even talk that much. I just ask simple questions and people just tell me.
Yes, because we feel comfortable.
Yeah.
Because this is something we've been holding for so long. Yeah. So somebody's talking to us about it.
Yeah.
I mean, our conversations, I haven't had those conversations, only with my psych therapist.
Right.
It's not something you can just sit
and say
and tell anybody.
Right.
It takes a special kind of person to be able to draw it out of you.
Yeah.
So we are more than eager after 40 years, but you coming and bringing it up, knowing that you're not from here, right. Knowing that you just got interested because there was something interesting that people just.
And that it affected me, that I know that so many Puerto Rican people's lives were lost.
Right.
I mean, I take the work very, very personally. You know what I mean? I feel just as angry. When I learned about the fires, I felt anger. You know what I mean? Like I operate from that place. I operate from that place still to this day, to this moment. I operate from anger. But at the same time, I take my anger and I'm conducive with it. I take my anger and I turn it into love. You see what I mean? I could beat my hand against the wall, but I choose not to. I could yell and curse and scream, but I choose not to. What I choose to do is be as efficient as possible to turn every stone, to talk to every person, to have those names spelled correctly, and to not have people die in vain. People that could have been my family die in vain. I refuse to let that happen. And so that is the thing that drives me. And so your question, you know, if you are driven with this intent, if you drive from a place of love, then you will make it. You will listen deeply. You will hear. You speak to people and you're juggling so many stories. You see connections that nobody else sees. You're, you know, like a conduit, man. Like, it's like, you're like, you are able to map an entire history in such a private, such a way that no one has ever mapped before. I hear so many of the same things about even what Janet was saying. I felt like so long I was crazy, like I dreamt this, like it wasn't real. Everyone that I speak with, almost everyone that I speak with has that same thing to say, and so many other similar things. So as I continue to work, my work essentially becomes to share that message with the public, is that this is what's at stake. This is what is taken from these lives. This is what it looks like. This is what it sounds like. This could be your mom, your brother, your sister. This is what happens when real estate and banks decide to change a city. This is the cost of the fancy restaurant and the coffee shop. This is it.
I named it what?
What would you say?
What did I name the article for the newspaper?
Oh yeah, a city built
On tombstones.
Yeah, the Jersey Journal just wrote an article about Janet and a little bit about me, but it was mostly about you.
Which I didn't know at the time, but yeah.
And then the headline of the newspaper is Janet's quote, "A city built on tombstones."
Yeah.
Brava, brava, brava. So making new history. And so I didn't see it coming, what this exhibition was going to do. I didn't.
You didn't think it was going to go.
I mean, no, as it was nearing opening, I felt that coming, that energy, but I had never thought about what an exhibition could do for the city, for people from this generation, from this time, in a way of healing. I didn't think that it would become the center for healing that it's become. It's more than an exhibition. It's like a healing center.
It is.
And so
you got to think.
You got to remember.
I lost 4 generations.
Yeah.
Out of our family's tree.
Yeah.
We lost, well, actually 3 generations, because my mom and stepdad are about the same one.
Yeah.
But then I lost the generation of my mother.
Yeah.
The generation of my brother, he was 15. And then the one of my nephew, which he was only 3 years old. 3 years old.
Yeah. And it's an amazing, this experience with this work, being in Hoboken this way. It will never be this way again. This work could never exist anywhere else in this capacity. And so I'm constantly in awe of what is happening in that place. You know, I think back on our first conversation and how emotional I was, and just to hear your story for the very first time, and to really get to know you and understand what it is to just really be so alone with something, and then come a whole year round. And, you know, the day of our event, I'm seeing you speaking to people in this place, and I'm just like, oh my God, you know?
Spoke to a lot of people.
It's just like, how is this possible?
It's like that picture you have that came out at the beginning, that it has the sketch of where the bodies were found.
Hmm.
Well, after the fire, one of the firefighters told me that they had found my entire family in the bed. Like, it caught them sleeping and they died while they were sleeping. And I actually felt that was a way, for me, it helped me cope, because in my mind, well, they suffocated before they burnt. But then I come to the museum and I look at this case and I see the names and it's my family. And I'm like, oh my goodness, they did not die on the bed. My mom and my stepdad were basically almost in the kitchen. And my brother and my nephew, one was off the bed and the other one was like getting off the bed. So they were not sleeping.
How's that make you feel?
That made me angry, because for me that was a comfort. Like, okay, they didn't suffer. You know, they didn't suffer, they suffocated, they didn't burn alive. But when I saw that, it was like, they lied to me. They were not in the bed. So that was like a rude awakening for me.
Thank you both so much for this conversation. I know we're running a little bit over time, but I really appreciate everyone who's here right now, and I have some closing remarks. But I do encourage everyone to, if ever you're in the New Jersey area, Hoboken area, please go visit the exhibit. It's brilliant. I can't wait to go see it next month. Can't wait to see you, Chris. Thank you again. So I have some notes because I don't want to forget names. Deep gratitude to both Chris and Janet for accepting, first of all, for accepting this invitation to be in conversation with us and for sharing your stories. They were a lot to take in, and I know that it takes a lot to share them as well. So we deeply appreciate that generosity. We would also like to thank a couple of people from the DSL who have been helping us out behind the scenes. So Dr. Figueroa Vasquez, thank you. Dr. Johnson, thank you. Jess Neal, thank you. Tatiana, Anais, Ariana, Stephanie, Dr. Tiana Williams, thank you so much for being a huge support behind the scenes for us and just help us moderate everything. Special thanks to Lexine and Bernice, who have been extremely helpful with the ASL interpretation. We also want to thank the Mellon Foundation for their support, and everyone in the audience tonight for your presence and your participation at our Microlab's very first public event. So we hope you enjoyed your time with us, and our Microlab remains, and archive will be hosting another virtual event in May. So on May 11th with Dr. Christina Sharp, to discuss her forthcoming book, Ordinary Notes. We also want to plug another event that is happening next week on March 21st with Dr. Figueroa Vasquez, who will be in conversation with Dr. M. Jackie Alexander. We also want to give a shout out to our friends at Afro Latinx Lab, who will be launching their first exhibit titled Alive in Their Garden tomorrow at the Lookout Gallery at Michigan State University. But for folks like myself who are not in the area, don't worry, the exhibit will be digitized and made available online. And for more info on all these wonderful events, follow us on our social media and check us out on dslprojects.org for all the events. And we will play a final song, so feel free to stick around and vibe with us, sit with all the stories that we've heard tonight. Thank you all so much. Thank you again, Chris. Thank you, Janet. Much love to you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Tatiana, play that song.